World War I cost somewhere around $200 billion. In 1918 money. Adjusted for today, the figure is almost incomprehensible. It was the most expensive event in human history up to that point. Millions of shells, millions of rifles, millions of men fed, clothed, transported, and armed for over 4 years of industrial slaughter. Here's the question almost nobody asks about the First World War. Who paid for it? Because the nations fighting it did not have that money. Not Britain, not France, not Germany, not Russia. None of them could pay for a war of that scale out of their own pockets. Their tax revenues covered only a fraction of what they were spending. So they borrowed. All of them. Enormously. And the answer to who lent them that money, and who profited from it, reshaped the entire world order. It explains why one country came out of the war as the dominant power on Earth without fighting for most of it. And it explains a great deal about the century that followed. This is the financial story of the First World War. Not who won it, who funded it. Start with the impossible arithmetic every warring nation faced. In 1914, the powers of Europe expected a short war. Months, not years. Instead, they got 4 years of the most materially expensive conflict ever fought, and the costs immediately exploded far beyond anything their normal budgets could absorb. A modern industrial war consumes money at a rate that peacetime taxation simply cannot match. You are not just paying soldiers. You are buying artillery shells by the millions, rifles, ammunition, uniforms, boots, food, horses, trucks, ships, aircraft, and replacing them all constantly, because war destroys them constantly. So every major combatant did the same 3 things. They raised taxes, but taxes are slow, unpopular, and nowhere near enough. They printed money, which quietly stole from their own citizens through inflation. And above all, they borrowed. They sold war bonds to their own populations. And critically, they borrowed from abroad. That third one is where the real story lives. Because when you borrow from abroad to survive, you don't just take on debt. You transfer power to whoever is lending. And there was one country in an extraordinary position to do that lending. It sat out most of the war, sold to both sides at the start, and emerged as the most powerful economy on Earth, without ever fighting for the first 3 years. Here's how that happened. When the war broke out in 1914, the United States was officially neutral. And neutrality, it turned out, was extremely profitable. Europe needed everything: steel, grain, munitions, explosives, machinery, and American industry could supply it. American exports to the Allied powers exploded. Factories ran at full capacity. American farmers, manufacturers, and shipping companies made enormous profits, selling to a continent that was burning itself down. At first, Europe paid in gold and by selling off assets. But that couldn't last. Britain and France quickly began to run out of ways to pay. So they turned to American credit. American banks, the House of Morgan most prominently, organized enormous loans to the Allied powers, allowing them to keep buying American goods on borrowed money. J.P. Morgan and Company became the principal purchasing agent for Britain in the United States, handling vast quantities of Allied war orders and helping arrange the loans that financed them. Look at what this created. The Allies bought American weapons and supplies, with money lent by American banks, which was then spent back into the American economy. Every year of the war, Europe grew poorer and more indebted, and America grew richer and more powerful. By the time the United States finally entered the war in 1917, it had already won the economic war. It had transformed from a debtor nation into the world's greatest creditor, and Europe owed it a fortune. Now, the question people always ask, and the one that attracts the most mythology: did the financiers fund both sides? Here's the honest, documented answer, because this is where a lot of nonsense gets attached to real history. At the very start of the war, American commerce and finance did flow to both camps to some degree. The United States was neutral, and neutrality technically allowed trade with everyone. Some American loans and trade were extended to Germany in the earliest phase. But it collapsed fast, and for a very practical reason: the British Navy. The Royal Navy's blockade physically cut Germany off from Atlantic trade. American goods and money simply could not reach Germany in any meaningful volume. Meanwhile, Britain and France could be supplied freely across the ocean. The market chose the side it could actually do business with. So the finance overwhelmingly flowed one direction: to the Allies. Not because of a secret plot, but because of a blockade and a balance sheet. You cannot sell to a customer you cannot reach. This matters because the popular conspiracy version, that a shadowy financial cabal deliberately funded both sides to profit from the slaughter, has been used for over a century as propaganda, often with an ugly anti-Semitic edge, and it does not survive contact with the evidence. The real story is less mysterious and far more useful. Money went where it could go, where it would be repaid, and where the naval power allowed it to travel. That's not conspiracy. That's how finance actually behaves. And it's more revealing than any myth. But here's the part that actually reshaped the 20th century. Because all that borrowing didn't just fund a war, it created a mountain of debt that had to be paid back afterward. And the way that debt was handled is what set the world on fire again 20 years later. When the guns stopped in 1918, the bills came due. Britain and France had borrowed enormously from their own citizens and from the United States. They now owed staggering sums to America, and they had a plan for paying it: make Germany pay them. The peace settlement imposed massive reparations on Germany, an enormous financial obligation on a defeated country whose economy was already shattered. Look at the chain that created. Germany owed reparations to Britain and France. Britain and France owed war debts to the United States. So the entire European financial system now depended on extracting money from a broken German economy and passing it westward across the Atlantic. It was a circle of debt with no real money in it. Germany could not realistically pay. It tried to cope partly by printing money. And the result was one of the most catastrophic hyperinflations in history, which wiped out the savings of the German middle class and devastated public trust in the entire system. American loans then flowed into Germany to help it pay reparations to Britain and France, so that they could pay their debts to America, money circling back to where it started. The whole structure was propped up by continued American lending, and when American credit dried up after 1929, the entire circle collapsed, dragging the world into the Great Depression. The economic ruin, the destroyed savings, the humiliation and instability that followed in Germany, these are among the conditions that extremists exploited to seize power in the 1930s. The First World War didn't end in 1918. It was refinanced. And the financial structure of that ending is one of the reasons the world went back to war 20 years later. So who actually funded World War I? Ultimately, ordinary people did. Through taxes, through war bonds bought by millions of citizens, through the inflation that quietly stole their savings, and through the debt their government strapped to future generations. But the nation that funded the war in the sense that mattered, the one that supplied and lent when everyone else was broke, was the United States. And it collected the prize. Not territory. Something better. It walked out of the war as the world's greatest creditor, with the financial center of gravity shifted permanently from London to New York. Here's the lesson that carries beyond 1918. And it's the reason this story matters at all. The winners of a war are not always the ones on the battlefield. In a long war, the decisive question is, who can pay? And behind that, who is lending? The lender ends up holding power over the borrower long after the shooting stops. Britain and France won the war and lost their financial supremacy in the process. America barely fought for most of it and inherited the world. Empires are not just conquered. They are foreclosed on. $200 billion. 4 years. An entire continent bankrupted. The armies decided who surrendered. The ledgers decided who ruled.